welcome to The Found Cause, where we found our cause and serve the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm Michael, the man behind the machine, yes. And to my front, it's virtual front.
S- Sebastian, the archivist.
We're virtual again. My own fault. I ate some bad pecan pie and I've been out for the week, so sent Sebastian back to his apartment. We are here virtually, though, doing another response video. We don't normally do two responses in a row, frankly. We have been planning, really, a review of fake conspiracy theories about what happened really in Jesus's time. And Sebastian's had this thing like in his back pocket for maybe a couple months now. And we keep meaning to do an episode on it. And like, I don't know if this episode will really satisfy that thing. So we may do that in the future. But Sebastian, you were sending us, because you have your ear to what's getting popular in the weird Christian debate scene, this guy, Wes Huff. And not only did you send me like a 3.5 hour podcast unrelated to this one, but he also did a debate before or after that podcast, somewhere on that podcast, and so suddenly he's blowing up. So we are apologists, amateur apologists in Christianity as well. So we're always looking out at apologists. How would you describe Wes Huff?
I would say a man after my own heart, especially after listening to that interview that he did on tech manuscripts, the Greek language, church history. He is a polymath, I would say, in that sense, and very sharp, very humble. I would say he has the same attitude as someone like Gavin Ortlund in the way he carries himself and speaks to people that might not deserve that kind of respect, but hey, to each their own, I suppose. He specializes in ancient manuscripts. Specifically, we're talking about Bible manuscripts, so that's you can even see it in the background right there. So Billy is, facing the man himself when it comes to someone who knows what they're talking about with biblical manuscripts. He is Canadian. They can't all be gems. Just kidding. Canadians are fine. And otherwise, I think he's a Baptist and has been traveling around the world. He was born in a missionary family, so he has that background with other religions in Pakistan, with Islam and Hinduism. So he is a well-rounded individual. I think that's the term.
And
Yeah.
it's not something that I think we had ever heard of until he started blowing up, right? Had you heard of him?
I have not. No, I wish I had, but hey, better late than never.
Yeah, he's definitely, like you said, polite. I didn't know him either, so I just know him from these couple impressions we've had. He is definitely polite. I would say classically Canadian. Not every Canadian is polite, as we all know, but like there is a Canadian stereotype of being polite and reasoned. It's like old British aristocracy holdover or something like that, and he definitely has that attitude, which is great for debates and things like this. When you want to handle your opponent with kid gloves because they barely agreed to do a debate. And in this case, I did not know who his debate opponent is here, so you, dear viewer, probably didn't know either. But Billy Carson is pictured on the left up there, black. He is a classic. We've reacted to people like him before. It's kind of every single weird new age anti-Christian theory there is, all combined into one. And he's got his own special blend that's always changing, and so you need to follow him so that you can know the truth too, because he's always reading something else, and he really holds all of his theories really loosely, except that the Bible is wrong, right? And that's what the channel Spirit Science we've reacted to is all about. That something Spirit Science and Billy Carson would hold in common is they are readers of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, which is some total fan fiction mythology that some guy in the modern day wrote. He said that he found emerald tell me where you've heard this one before. He found ancient emerald tablets that were detailing a secret history in Egypt. And has anybody ever seen these emerald tablets? No, but he translated them and then wrote them into English. And in those emerald tablets, it basically says everything you've known about Christianity is wrong. And also, aliens visited ancient Egypt, and they are the gods that the Egyptians worshipped. And Thoth, one of the Egyptian gods, was like a alien dude like you and me, but he had personality and he was fun, and he sat underneath the pyramids and lots of crazy stuff. If you've never heard that kind of stuff before, it's going to sound off the wall, and if you have heard it before, it is still crazy. Anyways, that's Billy Carson's brand. You'd think that would be like him and his mom and a couple guys in his local town that believe him, but he's got a pretty sizable following, enough that this debate being aired here by Wes Huff, which, as we already said, we'd never heard of, and we're kind of attached to the scene, is got 500,000 views on YouTube. So that's pretty great considering the original debate was taken down. Um, for context, before we let them play, we will let them play a lot. So we just wanted to give some serious context here. Billy Carson is the kind of huckster that does not debate. You will never find Kenneth Copeland, who's a Christian huckster, so a different brand of huckster, but you'll never find Kenneth Copeland or Spirit Science or these guys in a debate. I think Spirit Sciences has done some discussion, so I mean, maybe him. But real true hucksters who are making a lot of money off their stuff don't usually debate because there's way too much to risk, and they're not good at it anyway. So like, why expose yourself to that? Kind of like some presidential candidates we know. And so it wasn't really a debate, even though it's titled that. It was Billy Carson had a friend who's like a super, if he's a Christian, he's like barely a Christian, very, very unbalanced, immature Christian. And that immature Christian on the podcast who's sitting next to him said, "Hey, you hate Christians. How about I bring on like a guy who knows his stuff on Christianity and you guys can discuss?" And so it's really a podcast where they discuss things with Wes Huff,
Hmm.
but Billy Carson is so anti-Christian that his discussion topics are often aimed at, they're huge attacks against Christianity, and so Wes's discussion points are always rebuttals of some crazy thing that Billy Carson has said throughout the debate, and it really takes Billy Carson by surprise, so much so that he leaves. So it's 2 hours video here. He leaves hour and a half in, unexpectedly, and then sues both the Wes Huff and the podcast host here and anybody else involved. He's got a pending lawsuit for them to take it all down. It's still up, so the lawsuit's pretty terrible. It's not that there's nothing to sue over, but he's suing. And he's got all sorts of excuses on why this debate went so terribly. He says that not only did he have the flu or some sort of stomach bug, he was sick, but also he was thrown off by the fact that Wes Huff ends up having bad internet problems and his face disappears for like 10 seconds at a time. It's not a long time that was throwing him off. And that, and it keeps evolving to both the guys, the co-host and Wes were in on it together to like slam dunk him and ambush. And that they were purposely faking internet problems to throw off Billy Carson. And then the final piece de resistance, I think, was that Billy Carson said that he was deep faked, which is true to the last resort, I think, for somebody who is lost, because deep fake meaning somebody used AI to make it seem like Billy Carson was saying things that he didn't really say, to make his lips move in ways that they hadn't, and then, of course, fake a voice that he didn't really say. So the deep fake, the suing is pretty obvious that Billy Carson does not think he did well in this debate. The deep fake, I feel like, is the smoking gun to the fact that Billy Carson thought his answers, because obviously it's not deep faked, like, let's not be funny here. He thought his answers were so bad that somebody would have deep faked him saying them so that they could beat him in a debate. They were that bad. And so you'll hear him. Definitely not deep faked, especially with the changing story. I mean, it's very obvious that this is the real debate. And it didn't go so bad. Like, it wasn't so embarrassingly bad that I would have thought that he would be suing and other things like that. But men of small egos often have, or men of fragile egos often have that kind of reaction. And so it's a rare glimpse at watching a huckster actually have to defend some of his positions and failing. And so with all that context in mind, I'm going to play a couple clips for you that Sebastian has picked out. Any more context before we start?
Yes, let's add also Wes Huff. Before this was a nobody. Let's just highlight. And then Billy Carson, he had been, if I recall, on the Joe Rogan podcast. So, there's
and others, yeah, like he's done the podcast rounds with major people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is just so you know going in, so to see if his reaction is well deserved, you judge that for yourself.
Yep. All right, let's do it.
A bit of a jaunt, but I really appreciate the fact that you seem to have investigated to a certain degree some of these facts. Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure. So for context, we're cutting in 10 minutes here, but Billy Carson had given some facts, where he says that Jesus wasn't really God. It's back to this whole ancient aliens thing. I think that's kind of, a lot of theories change, but the general gist is that Jesus wasn't God and that he was some sort of incarnate alien, ascended master, some wise guy. But he wasn't God, and everything we think about him is wrong. and it like conspiratorially wrong. Like the Romans and early Christians faked a lot of what we had to say about Jesus, and if we really knew what he was teaching, he would have taught us about Thoth and ancient aliens and transcendental meditation and whatever else. So what Hindus say. Honestly, it's half the time what Muslims say. That was what he basically said, was that Christ's real message was about achieving Christ consciousness, not anything that we know about him today.
Don't forget the time traveling Jews and the nuclear wars in Mars.
Yeah, I don't know how deep Billy Carson gets into that side of things, but yes, the Emerald
Spirit science, by the way. Yeah.
the Spirit Science would say that there are time traveling Hebrews involved in this story. You can watch our reaction if you really want. You want to really get deep into the crazy, but we won't get that deep here because it's too much. It's a rabbit hole.
When you say the Sinai Bible,
And the piece de resistance, just to give you more context, was that, one of the points that Billy says is showing that Christians have doctored everything we know about Jesus today is that there's a Sinai Bible, which is not the way people normally refer to it. In case you know your Bibles, there's a Bible, ancient Bible that we found in Sinai. It's a big codex of books, inclusive of the Bible, but also with a couple other books. And he said that it's ancient, and it does not have Jesus being crucified. And so the crucifixion narrative about Jesus is all doctored and added later. That's his claim.
And he has said this over and over and over again in all, just gentle, passive podcasts in which he gets no pushback. He said what you're describing, Michael. So, here's somebody that's going to ask him in a very polite way, could you say a little bit more about that? And then the moment he asks just a nice question, like the nice Canadian he is, the whole conspiracy just unravels.
Yeah.
What are you referring to specifically?
It's the biblical text that was written. It made it into you can actually look it up on Amazon. It's a Bible I have a version at home. It's called the Sinai Bible, right, from Mount Sinai. I'm assuming it's the mountain that they're referencing there. But
he's assuming whatever. How deep we were going to go, I'm just going to let them play. But know that Billy Carson is very uninformed on what Sinaiticus is. We normally call it Sinaiticus. It's a text found at Mount Sinai. Arguably, it's not really Mount Sinai, but whatever. That's beside the point. In the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, and nobody calls it the Sinai Bible. Only Billy Carson would ever call it the Sinai Bible. And if you buy it on Amazon, it's called Sinaiticus. It just shows that he doesn't really do this depth of research.
No, I would actually say it. The impression I'm getting is he must have found that on Wikipedia, because the only place that I could see it as Sinai Bible is Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you talk to anybody, like fellow audience, that we listen to James White. He's also a textual scholar. He calls it Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Vaticanus, Codex Washingtonianus. So that's the proper name.
And I don't really blame him for not knowing that much, because if you get into these weird, obscure texts, the more obscure they get, the more there are, because there's like weird things everywhere. And so it takes somebody with basically no life to really read all these things. I have not read all of Sinaiticus. Sebastian hasn't. Sebastian's pretty nerdy. You can read it, and we've looked it up, but you have not read cover to cover, because who does that, right? It's way too much to read. And so I'm not really blaming him for not really having done this in-depth research, but you may hear it. He says it in this debate. I don't know if we'll have it in the clips. But his claim to being such a wise guru kind of guy is that he just does much reading, so much research. And he clearly does not. He does the Wikipedia search, which, so do I. But I don't make any money off this podcast, and this guy's making tons of money off views that are an inch deep. And okay, so we keep pausing it. I'm sorry, we have so much debate to go through. We're just gonna let
they
it
put
run.
together their own version of the biblical text prior to the King James version being put out.
Obviously, it's prior to the King James. Whatever. Yes, King James, Middle Ages. Sinaiticus, not the Middle Ages. Many versions in between. For the record, kind of how the Bible works.
Yeah, 320, 325, 350 is more or less time frame for Codex Sinaiticus. Very expensive, probably commissioned by the Roman Emperor. Just a theory, because of how much money and resources it would have taken to make it. It's a chunky codex, so it's by the time of Nicaea, more or less.
And it's not even it was in historical obscurity. We did not know about it. It wasn't famous until it was rediscovered in modern times. So it's not one that has a lot of influence on modern things, except that we use it as another one of many texts that we use to make sure our Bible is accurate. That's all. And spoiler alert, it's a normal Bible. It definitely has Jesus being crucified. You'll see on your own Bibles in the footnotes, if you have a study Bible, sometimes there'll be a reference to Sinaiticus and say this version or Sinaiticus has a different reading here. But it's always the tiny stuff that you see in your footnotes. Like instead of angels, it has one angel or whatever. It's very, very similar to a regular old Bible because that's what Bible variants are. They're almost always the Bible, very boringly, just the Bible with like a the changed. So that's what Sinaiticus is. It's nothing secret.
Sure. So when you refer to the Sinai Bible, would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus, like the codex that comes? Okay. That's why I was trying to get some clarification, because so you can actually go and see Codex Sinaiticus is at the British Library. So you can go and see it. It's on display. And the British Library has actually digitized the entire manuscript. So I work with manuscripts in my linguistic work. I'm an expert on early Christian scribal culture, and particularly in Greek and Coptic manuscripts.
That's the kind of weirdo you have to be, by the way, to read all these things. Is like your job to be a linguistics expert in something really specific.
I actually have
a man after my own heart.
I have
and
a
now
facsimile, so I
Billy
have a
knows he's
photocopy.
in deep trouble.
Yeah.
when he's
It was done by the British Library.
Well, because obviously he hasn't done hard to do that kind of research, but like when you make weird claims, when you ask dumb questions, get dumb answers.
If you're gonna attack Christianity the way you do with so many viewers, you need to back it up somehow. Come on.
Well, and it's all backed up by like secret knowledge. It's one thing if it was like a logical argument, but it's like I have secret knowledge of secret facts, and so if you have secret knowledge of secret facts, be prepared for somebody to secretly fact check you.
Of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office. So I have it here. And the only reason I asked for clarification is because I want to make sure that
It's the Friday the 13th sale. One day only. Get 13 of...
I'm addressing is actually what you mean.
Gotcha.
And not addressing something else. Because the Codex Sinaiticus in particular is just it's a 4th century Greek manuscript. Mm-hmm. It comes from approximately between 325 and 350 AD. And its text of the Gospels reads almost identical to the modern Greek text that we develop translations from. So my curiosity is just simply in kind of exploring when you say that it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there. I mean, I can go on right now, Codex Sinaiticus, and I can look up the end of, say, Matthew 27, where it has Jesus being crucified. And that's in Codex Sinaiticus, or, the John 19. Or any of the other ones. So I think my confusion is that it doesn't read any differently. So actually, are you able to pull up a website with the viewers or listeners or whatever be able to see that?
Right now to make sure I have the version that I'm looking at.
While he's pulling that up too.
I'm just going to pause it. Co-host, by the way, very unhelpful, totally not useful commentary. Super baby Christian, has nothing real to say. You can watch it for yourself if you want to hear what he has to say, but we're going to kind of skip what he has to say. Billy Carson is currently Googling. He's like, oh, snap. Apparently he's never had anybody call him on this. And it's not even me and Sebastian know this particular fact, and we're not scholars of the sword. So it's not an obscure fact. It's obscure to normal people, but it's not obscure to people who actually care about this stuff.
I mean, since he is not I don't think he's able to pull it up. So I pulled it up. You can go right now on Google, codexsinaiticus.org. It's right there. John 20. And the soldiers therefore, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, for each soldier part, and his coat. But the coat was without seam, woven from the top throughout. And then it goes on and displayed, and then he was buried and rose again. Nothing secret. The Greek is painful to read, so I'm glad someone did a transcript in normal Koine Greek, because on top of that, there's spelling mistakes, and if you know about ancient manuscripts, it's all one huge run on the sentence. The whole book is just one run on sentence. Yeah. Absolutely terrible. Somebody should have gone back in time and tell these people, okay, you people need to put punctuation marks or at least space between words. Thank Charlemagne that he at least created, uppercase, lowercase letters, so that helped a little bit, but painful to read. So I think you mentioned, Michael, if you do end up reading the Sinaiticus or any other manuscript, you're going to see mistakes, but they're mostly spelling mistakes or like a word is omitted because, again, it's one terrible looking, huge run-on sentence, and it was all copied by hand. Yep. And no light, well, light, but candlelight. So you can imagine how tedious it must have been.
And that's the same way for any ancient document. It's not the Bible is not
Yeah.
unique in that regard because everybody had to handwrite it, and same problems happen with everything like that.
Like
What's
I
cool
keep
is that it
saying to all
survived.
Right.
the people that aren't scientists traveling the world and
So that's good.
No,
Well,
I'm just gonna skip.
I'm
it.
just
So-
curious, like
Yeah, you
the
can skip it. Yeah, that's
Sinai Bible, where was that
I
piece
found the
discovered?
text where I was referencing. Actually, I was misquoted. I misquoted there. It's the Gospel of Barnabas.
Which,
Oh no.
in case you're listening closely, the Gospel of Barnabas is very different than the Sinai Bible. So our local expert is totally wrong, and he's given up on that point. He's like, "Oh, it wasn't the Sinai Bible." So now he's completely ignored the Christians have been slowly doctoring the Bible narrative over the years, because if he's not referencing a secret Bible, because he's given up on that one, because the Sinai Bible does have the crucifixion, he's now referencing a unaccepted book, a book that Christians don't accept as scripture. So we've gotten way less authoritative, way less sharp of an attack from Billy, but Wes doesn't let up. So that's victory number one, is obviously the Sinai Bible, as he says, does have the crucifixion in it because it's a regular Bible. But now he says, but the Epistle of Barnabas, that.
No, Michael, you made
Sorry,
that
not the
mistake. No,
epistle,
no, no.
the
It's not the
Gospel of
epistle.
Barnabas. My apologies.
Yeah. The Epistle of Barnabas is in Sinaiticus, and that's it's pretty normal. One is Shepherd of Hermas is also in there. Pretty normal.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
not authoritative, but
Christian
they
writing.
are pretty normal Christian fanfics. The Gospel of Barnabas, I think Wes will say it.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, so that's good. So let's deal with that too, because I've actually worked with. There are two manuscripts of the Gospel of Barnabas. The Gospel of Barnabas is a really interesting document because
When we say we create
so many ads, my
personalized hair
apologies.
care products, we mean truly personalized.
it is a known forgery, and so that's why I think it's important to get to these sources. So at the very start of the Gospel of Barnabas,
the slow nodding from Billy Carson, if you're watching, he's like, "Oh, yep, you got me there." It's like- he's not even looking offended. He's not like, "What? I don't know what to say about that." And he's like, "Oh, it's a known forgery." Like, he knows that he's Wikipediaing these things on the fly.
which we only have two copies of, one is in Italian and one is in Spanish. We see right
Pause
off the
right there.
bat.
What's the problem with it being in Italian or Spanish?
It's not even close to the original version. If he's complaining that the Bible has been changed over the years because we only have thousands of copies of it that all look the same, how much more could something that you don't even have the original language of it, right? Obviously, Jesus and the apostles and Barnabas were not speaking in Italian or Spanish because those are both modern languages. So it's way later. Even if there was an original version of the Gospel of Barnabas, we've lost it, right? We've lost even the original language it was in, let alone the original document.
That the Gospel of Barnabas, not to be confused with either the Epistle of Barnabas or the Acts of Barnabas, which are two apocryphal documents from the 2nd century, but the Gospel of Barnabas in particular, we know it's a forgery because it does things like in chapter 92, it says that Jesus spent 40 days on Mount Sinai, and then he came to the Jordan River and he walked to Jerusalem. But Mount Sinai is more than a week's journey away from Jerusalem, and neither Mount Sinai nor Jerusalem are close to the Jordan River. So never mind there not being a route from the Jordan River to
Billy just keeps nodding his
like
head.
around Mount Sinai or going to Jerusalem. But there are internal problems with the Gospel of Barnabas, which indicate that it shows no actual indication of evidence of coming from or even having knowledge of first century Jewish understanding. It actually says Jesus is the Christ, but not the Messiah, which indicates that whoever the author is, he didn't know that those were the same words. And I think a bigger problem,
Which, yikes, obviously it was written probably in Italian or Spanish, not in Greek.
Yeah.
There's the knowledge there.
Yeah,
is that
and if you see his even books from that time, because the people that could have written this fan fiction, they had never traveled to the Middle East. They draw King David or Goliath or Saul as the Medici family. Like, they have like all these garbs that are very medieval from Europe, so because they had never been there. So this is going to be important later, but Wes just demonstrated how to evaluate a textual document. You're going to think, what the heck are you talking about, Sebastian? But this will be important later on in this very same conversation, that you need to evaluate, does the person writing know anything about the country or land where the Gospel of Barnabas takes place? No, because Mount Sinai is nowhere close to the Jordan River. So that's how, and we've talked about Gnosticism in another episode. That's how you can also rule out a lot of the Gnostic books that were written so much later than the events, and that they get a lot of facts wrong from the time. Like they make stuff up. They call cities, for example, that were renamed after the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. So that's how you know that these were written after the fact. So he's just demonstrating how to analyze a document, something that someone in this conversation doesn't really know how to do. But I'll leave that for later on.
Yes.
The Gospel of Barnabas actually paraphrases Dante's Inferno, which was written in 1314.
That's funny.
So there's a lot of internal evidences that disqualify the Gospel of Barnabas. Never mind the fact that we don't have any evidence of it prior to the 14th century, and none in any other language other than Middle Age Italian Italian and Spanish. But the internal content of the Gospel of Barnabas disqualifies it from being ancient. And then the fact that it's doing things like paraphrasing Dante, or it also refers to a rule of the time of Jubilee, which was changed in the Middle Ages from what it was in the biblical year of Jubilee. And it goes with the Middle Ages concept, not the ancient concept. So I think what I'm getting at is, so I'm a historian and I deal with sources. So when I'm looking at sources, I want to make sure that I have a methodology by which I approach any type of source. So if there is something that denies the crucifixion, I want to make sure that I'm analyzing it and that the methodology by which I analyze it actually reveals that the content can be accurately tied to the event. So if we're talking about, say, Codex Sinaiticus, that's in the 4th century. Now that is, I would agree with you, Billy, our oldest copy of the Bible in the sense of cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation copy of the Bible.
Right.
The problem is that we have individual copies of all 4 Gospels going back hundreds of years before Codex Sinaiticus. So I have a facsimile behind me of P66. This is a late 2nd century copy of the Gospel of John. I work with this particular manuscript. I can just show the screen right here. This is an almost complete copy of the Gospel of John. And it has the crucifixion.
By any chance?
Yeah, so papyrus is just the what it's made out of. So
I got that from ChatGPT, by the way.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
guys, I'm just
I can actually.
smart for a second.
I have that papyrus at home.
Oh, that's
I the moderator.
Yeah, so I'll show you this. So I make, so the documents you actually see on my bookshelf behind me are facsimile papyri that I've made. So when I was in Egypt last summer, I went and I made for me some papyrus sheets. And so I take these papyrus sheets, which are made from the papyrus plant. And then when I go and I look at actual manuscripts, so I was at the University of Philadelphia last summer, and I went and I saw a document called P1, which is a 3rd century fragment of the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew.
Can you tell that Wes is a big nerd?
Is I sat down with that original and I produced a facsimile. So I copied the text. First of all, I cut it out with an X-Acto knife in not the original 3rd century one on my papyrus. I cut out with an X-Acto knife this guy, and then I copied the text transcriptionally on the front and the back. So
this is the weirdo that gets researched. And obviously he only knows this weird slice of Christian early manuscripts. But that's like the kind of weirds. If anybody was going to come up with a theory that Christianity was wrong because of weird facts and hidden manuscripts, it'd be a nerd like this, right? Somebody who makes fake ones, model ones at his own house, and like reads all the actual languages. Whereas, why would Billy Carson know these secret things from Wikipedia or from like watching a movie once? Like that's the level of knowledge difference we've got here. Is Billy Carson Wikipedia things, and Wes like is a super nerd who goes into it. I don't claim to be as detailed as Wes. Neither of us do. I think Sebastian's closer than I. But I also don't claim to be disproving any faith, including Christianity, off of like obscure facts. I always try to use the accepted facts. Like I use the accepted Quran. I don't go into weird conspiracy theories about the Quran to disprove Islam. If Billy Carson was trying to disprove Christianity, he should use accepted facts, because clearly he's not in a league where he can be questioning obscure phraseology because he doesn't read it. He doesn't know the languages. Like don't play where you can't fight. Yes. And if you're, again, listening closely, he just got shot down. Immediately he admits that he got shot down on the Codex Sinaiticus claim, and now he's getting utterly shut down on the Gospel of Barnabas, which is a forgery, and he's just sitting there nodding his head the whole time. Yep, you got me, like, no fight, because he doesn't have any legs to stand on. He doesn't know anything about the Gospel of Barnabas like Wes does, clearly.
Papyrus is just simply, it's what it's made out of.
Yeah.
And so there's categorizing systems. And the standard one is called the Gregory Allant categorizing system. And so sometimes you'll see when manuscripts are mentioned, they'll have a GA and then a number behind it. if it's made of papyrus, you simply abbreviate the word papyrus to P, and then you have the numbering system. So P66, what I showed you earlier, that's this on the categorizing system. It's the 66th manuscript that was put into the system. It's from the Gospel of John. I also have, P46 and P47 on my shelf, which includes all 4 Gospels and Acts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries.
Okay, I appreciate the commitment. I love the Greek language. I read my Greek Bible, and I have all those annotations at the bottom of my Greek Bible. The P and then the number of the manuscript. I don't think I would ever go that far. It's like, okay, I'm going to frame a manuscript or
Not
like
only
make
does
it
he frame it,
myself.
he recreated them. He made them. At least some of them.
Commitment right there.
He says. And he can go on. I think we don't want to play him forever. How long did you want to go on this one? Is this about where you want to stop? 20 minutes?
Push it a little bit more.
Okay.
So
speed it. No. Okay, never mind.
Save the children. Sorry for all the ads. Goodness. YouTube really likes this video.
The only hesitation I have with what you said, Billy, is that we have single copies of the Gospels that can be dated to the 2nd century that all do have the crucifixion. And so if we're relying on something like the Gospel of Barnabas, which is not just like, it's not that there's debate about it, it's that it's a known forgery. No one's referring to the Gospel of Barnabas as anything other than...
If you say it's a known forgery, yes, but I'm going to go with that. Let's talk about the Old Testament a little bit and leading up into...
no! That's a deflection.
Not even a hidden deflection. He's saying, okay, yep, you beat me there. Let's talk about something else. So to gloat in the victory a little bit, yes, all claims about Christians making up the crucifixion later on, say they're faking it, I guess, at the moment that it happened. But if you're saying they're changing the faith as it goes, are bunk. They're bogus. Everything he said about it is a lie. He should not be trusted, at least on that. And honestly, if somebody is so easily, okay, well, that was fake, but what about this? They're not a serious thinker, because they should really suddenly go, oh my gosh, I might have a lot of things wrong. Like, I should take a step back and maybe stop being a teacher on this subject, right? Or running podcasts, running on other people's podcasts, disseminating this kind of information if you didn't do even cursory research on these things. But he's totally willing to drop that one and go to a different one. Again, that's like your local guy at Walmart might do that, but not somebody who's supposed to be top dog, top scholar on the issues, which tells you what kind of scholarship is going on in Billy Carson's world.
Hold on, because do you mind if I address the Gospel of Jesus' wife?
Sure, go ahead.
What was her name?
Yeah,
I'm like trying to write notes like I know what I'm doing, but I'm just curious.
So the Gospel of Jesus' wife doesn't actually mention. So oftentimes...
What you missed also when we skipped ahead 10 minutes is that one of the many things that Billy Carson brought up was that Jesus had a wife. And that was another thing that Christians have covered up, because he wasn't really God. He was just a dude.
What happens is that the text of the Gospel of Jesus' wife is kind of paralleled with the Gospel of Philip, which mentions that that Jesus would kiss Mary Magdalene on the mouth. And so those are kind of used in parallel to kind of for this argument that Jesus was married. So the Gospel of Jesus' wife is in the Harvard Library. However, the reason we know it's also not legitimate is because even though the manuscript, the papyrus that it's on, was carbon dated to the 4th century, the text was actually copied from a PDF version of the Gospel of Thomas known as Grandin's Interlinear. And there was a mistake in the Coptic text of Grandin's Interlinear that was copied into the Gospel of Jesus' wife. So we know that this is not a legitimate document, even though the papyrus is ancient, and this happens a lot with forgeries. I have a couple of friends who have actually worked on projects that have revealed forgeries within Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts and within other ancient Christian papyri. But the reason why we know the Gospel of Jesus' wife, and that Karen King, who kind of vouched for it, and she lost a lot of credibility, unfortunately, for her, and she's admitted that it's a fake as well, was because we can tie it directly to not copying from an ancient text, but actually copying from an online version of the Gospel of Thomas in a PDF form. And the mistake on that PDF form was copied into the text that was borrowed in the phraseology of Jesus' wife. So
that is a big boo-boo for Billy. You should not be relying on something that you got off a PDF by mistake.
Well, Billy, yes. Clearly the document is fake, and Billy didn't look these things up, and it should be telling too that there are those who would fake such a thing. They want to make Jesus have a wife, and so they go to all the lengths to find ancient papyri to write on fake gospels. Like, if you were Billy and you were intellectually honest, you might be going like, your alarm bells might be going off that maybe I'm being duped. Like maybe these sources that I have gone to find these things that say Christianity is all wrong, we've gotten everything wrong about Jesus, are actually hostile to Christianity and making stuff up. But if you are hostile to Christianity and making stuff up yourself, you're probably not that offended that you're using sources that do the same thing. And so Billy Carson is just hostile. He just doesn't like Christianity. And so it doesn't matter the sources. He just wants to delegitimize it quickly and then move on to his weird stuff, right? So he's never gone deeper than Christianity is illegitimate. Here's a vast list of sources that say it is, and move on instead of looking at each source. So here, under the magnifying glass, he is not looking at the camera, he's looking down at the table, he has nothing to say, and he keeps wanting to move on to the next thing. Well, if you disprove that one, how about this one? You disprove that one, how about this one?
So I just point that out is, once again, with our sourcing, I think we need to make sure that we're going towards not just early sources, but actually credible sources. And unfortunately, neither the Gospel of Barnabas nor the Gospel of Jesus' wife are credible sources in terms of actually, and
Feel confident about weight loss with compounded semaglutide injections made with the same
agreed upon by not just the vast majority of scholarship, but I don't know anybody in the field of papyrology, paleography, historiography who actually refers to these documents as being legitimate.
That's fair enough. I can respect that. So let's go into the Old Testament a little bit.
Sweep it on the rug. Okay. Fair enough.
Predominantly, from my research, I discovered that a lot of information from the Enuma Elish and the 7 tablets of creation is a lot of in Genesis, a lot of the creation story that comes into Genesis. Not all of it, but because obviously it's Genesis is a much smaller version of a much bigger story. But it's literally almost word for word from the Enuma Elish.
Which we did
almost word for word. Okay, that's the claim.
Yeah, we did a reaction to Religion for Breakfast, who was comparing the flood myths, the creation myths of the ancient Near East and Christianity, Judaism. And they mentioned this Enuma Elish, so I guess you can do deeper research. You can watch our videos, you can watch somebody else's video on that if you want more depth there. But he's claiming that an ancient Babylonian mythology was copied by Christians, and so it's evidence that the creation story of Genesis is at least as fake as the Babylonian myth was, because they're copying each other. He says word for word. He says Genesis is small and Enuma Elish is some giant epic, so they're not the same length. They don't copy each other perfectly, but the things that are in Genesis are just copies of the Enuma Elish, which he says Enumi Elish. I don't know. It's pronouncing it strange. So do I. So again, Billy Carson and me, I guess, are about on the same level.
And the 7 tablets of creation, the Epic of Atrahasis as well, is also there in the Old Testament. Several other
Atrahasis is how it's normally pronounced, and also same deal, same Near Eastern flood myth. I think it's a variation of the Enuma Elish. It's like one found in Ugarit ruins, but it's the same story generally.
Tablets as well, Code of Hammurabi and a few others have made it into that text.
The Code of Hammurabi is a law code, made it into Genesis? No, now he's talking about, I suppose, the laws like Exodus. So totally different parts of the Bible, but he's saying, skip ahead to the Bible. It also copies the Codes of Hammurabi, which those who know that it definitely doesn't. The Code of Hammurabi is a totally different law code than the law code given by God. They are both law codes, though, so got us there. Same with Genesis. Wes is going to talk about it, but they are both creation stories, the Enuma Elish and Genesis, but that's all they have in common, so that's it. Got us there.
Sumerian cylinder scrolls that talk about the creation story. Again, the creation story in the Epic of Atrahasis. And so we tend to see this copying of ancient tablets, text, and scriptures, even some papyruses, into the biblical text. Meaning that my point here is that I think a lot of people are saying that this information was written in real time. A lot of people believe that. If you ask the average person, they really believe that. But a lot of this
the average person thinks that Genesis was written in real time. I mean, the Christians don't really think, often about the origin of the text, but I don't think that most Christians would say that Adam or God or somebody was writing Genesis while it was happening. It's all spoken in past tense anyways. So I think even your layman Christian would probably say that Moses wrote it, or he doesn't know who wrote it, right? But I don't think he'd say that it was written by Adam or by God.
Yeah,
information is just copied from older tablets and texts from an earlier date. That's what I found. That it's made it into the canonized Bible, but they never referenced that they got it from any other ancient texts and tablets that have to do with a totally different civilization with totally different religious beliefs.
Have you read the Enumalish?
Yeah, I've done.
Good question.
Do you mind? Sure. Do you mind summarizing the content of the creation account in the Enumalish for us?
Sure. The Enumalish is a very ancient text discovered in the Library of Ashurbanipal, and the summary of it is that it really gives us an account, which is crazy, an astronomical account of the creation of our solar system. It talks about planets and moons gaining specific orbits around the sun. It talks about a huge planet named Tiamat, 4 to 6 times larger than Earth.
For the Christian listening, does it sound like Genesis? Not really. Clearly, he knows these parts because it goes into his other weird stuff, right? Like he knows about Tiamat, it's all this like planet stuff that goes into his mythologies, but they're definitely not Christian mythologies so far.
I'm getting flashbacks to when I used to watch History Channel, and they loved going to this in Ancient Aliens.
Yes, and like even separate from Ancient Aliens, it's like Hunt for Planet X. There's like other History Channel stuff where we're like looking for these planets that are referenced, even if there's no aliens involved. It's like maybe the ancients knew something somehow about things that happened millions of years ago.
Earth didn't exist at the time that this, according to the author of this text, which is pretty interesting. And then there talks about a nemesis of sorts. In the original version, it's called Nibiru, but in a more recent version, still thousands of years old, the name was changed to Marduk. Marduk is in the Jewish American Library, in the biblical text, in the Torah, and so forth. Very
Marduk, like the god Marduk, Babylonian god.
A common name too. There's a king called named Evil Marduk, I believe is how it's pronounced.
Yeah,
he's not evil. I mean, he was evil, yes, but not just a coincidence how it sounds the same in English.
Referenced in Daniel, right?
Times in the religious books and text. Marduk wanted to be the destroyer, so Marduk is the one.
The average person sees around 10,000 online ads daily.
Gracious.
Here's how a man's life would change.
That during its next orbit towards Tiamat, crashed into Tiamat and destroyed Tiamat. A huge chunk of it swung away, recoalesced, taking the water, land, and organic material, which basically recoalesced as our planet here, Earth. And the rest of it broke up into pieces. Some of it turned into the asteroid belt.
I like that Wes is drinking water or whatever, some coffee there, because this account clearly is nothing like Genesis, for the record. And it's kind of funny that he doesn't know anything. Billy Carson doesn't know anything about the previous text he talked to. He does know lots of details about this crazy fake mythology thing. And he just claimed again that Genesis copies it word for word, and it's something crazy. Like it's not familiar to Christians at the very least.
Parts of it were thrown towards the sun, and some were thrown towards the inner Oort cloud, towards the outer edge of the solar system. This planet or this moonlet that orbited supposedly a brown dwarf, based on the description of it, gained a very strange orbit around our sun. And we have the scientific evidence now also to match with NASA's data, where we see that Saturn and I believe Neptune switch places. Uranus is flipped on its side, and that's more evidence that something came through our solar system in ancient times and gravitationally really tugged at planets here and switched up their orbits and even pulled the axis of a planet on its own side, where the equator is now running north and south. So a little bit of modern astrophysics kind of backs up what this ancient text is saying. But the Enumalish also then begins to talk about the fact that these beings, it kind of cuts into the fact that these beings, are on Earth and at some point begin to engage mankind. In other words, they didn't create people from scratch, but they engaged the existing hominid and began to...
Existing hominid. Gosh, you know what it is. It's gods engaged with men. Like that's what the text says. It doesn't say hominids or beings. He's using that as like, he's pulling out ancient aliens, which of course, Enumalish was never thinking about aliens.
And also, he pretty much gave it away there that they didn't create mankind; they just engaged mankind. Whereas last time I checked, Yahweh in the Genesis story makes mankind.
Yes.
Began to utilize us as workers for their workforce. In the Atrahasis epic, you see a much similar story, like slightly later date period, but still thousands of years old. The epic of Atrahasis, and we see a very similar story, and we see where the sons of God literally came down to Earth. They came from Mars, according to this text. If you read the translation of the planet Mars and to English,
just like Genesis, Genesis does have sons of God, angels. So I guess there is that. And they do come down to Earth, not from Mars.
And then they went to battle. They were going to go to battle in South Africa against Enki and Lil and Anu.
Yes, also not in Genesis. Battle in South Africa against Enkidu.
And they come to terms without going to battle. They argue that they needed women, human women, believe it or not. And they also wanted a workforce. They didn't want to continue to do the labor. They were cleaning out the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, digging canals, building cities on Earth, and according to the text on Mars, not according to me. and a decision was made by Enki and Anu and Enlil to allow this experiment to happen, where they would take the existing hominid here, they would slay one of the gods, meaning that they would, in my opinion, that doesn't mean they're going to kill it, but somehow some type of genetic modification or manipulation, in my personal opinion, that's my personal hypothesis. But in the end, it ends up being that human beings are now doing a lot of this labor and worshiping these people as gods, as they, my personal opinion, masqueraded as gods. A lot of stories there, parallel stories that you see in the Bible, even the Tower of Babel incident, and many other crazy stories that are in.
Parallel is a great word because they pass each other like two parallel lines, never intersecting.
Never intersecting.
Yeah.
In the Bible, you can find a lot of those true stories in the ancient text, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where you can find the true story of Noah. They found the Noah.
Oh my goodness! Oh no! Well, we've done that episode with it for Virgin for Breakfast and the Noah. He's just casually mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and go listen to that other longer episode for more details. But
also, like, what gall it is to say that it's real. Why? How would you say that when you don't believe the biblical texts? What makes you believe these texts? Because you think they are older? Okay, like there's a lot of older texts about medicine that we don't believe because they're wrong. So in the same way, should we believe a text just because it's older? I would not think so. And purportedly, both texts, Genesis and the Enuma Elish, were written well after the events that they're talking about. And so does it really benefit one versus the other to be closer to the events, because it's still thousands of years past those events?
To give him instructions on how to build the ark. It wasn't a big boat. It was a round disc that he built with.
Favoring the Enuma Elish over the Bible is kind of funny to me.
The sections cut up on the inside like a pie. That was discovered about 4 or 5 years ago. I believe it's at the British Museum now. So there's a lot of text that's just been covered and copied over into the biblical text. And I think that, in my personal opinion, a lot of people are just became a cargo cult, worshiping people that were masquerading as gods. I do believe in God, by the way. Let me make this clear. I believe in God. I believe there's a creator of the universe. I believe that the mathematics of quantum physics all proves that. The fact that we're here, I believe this universe is imbued with a divine energy and a divine spark that lives inside of all of us. I just don't believe that the God of the Bible is truly the creator of the universe. I don't think that God needs money. I don't think that God needs.
Sure. Do you mind if I just jump in here for a second? Because I think
if you notice a little Gnosticism creeping in, that the God of the Bible is actually Satan. Is what the push is there. The God of the Bible is a liar, a false God, and that he's teaching you false things, and that's why we have to find the true God, the divine spark in all of us, or whatever else. That very ancient heresy, Gnostic, New Age as well. It's pretty common in the New Age movements to say that kind of thing.
Yaldabaoth and Pleroma, anybody?
Yeah. Gnostics.
I think we've kind of gone on from the original question. I appreciate that. I do have a few issues with your summary, although I think I have read the Akkadian version. My Akkadian's not great, but I sat down with a seriologist friend and we walked through it.
That's like, oh yes, I was just reading the Akkadian version.
Totally different level, right? Yes.
A couple years ago. So I think that there are components of what you said that I would say are in there. I'm not sure it's the best summary. Nonetheless, okay, going with what you said that there were like verbatim parallels with the biblical creation story. Even just going off of what you said, which I think there are components of that I would agree with, the Battle of the Gods, the concept of Enki and the younger gods, and they fight Tiamat, and then Marduk, who swears he'll defeat Tiamat, and Kwenku, who kills Tiamat by shooting her with an arrow, and there's this big battle, and then the gods that die end up being the earth and the sky and even us, because we are the end result of that battle. I'm just curious, when you say that there are not just parallels, but there's actual copying, looking at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, where the creation story is summarized in the Bible, what are the actual kind of parallels there that you're looking to? Because as someone who's read both, I not only do I not find parallels, I actually...
You're not a child, you're a man. So stop wearing so many layers to go outside and get the bare...
And this is the majority of ancient Near Eastern scholarship with me, think that Genesis chapter 1 is actually unapologetic against documents like the Enuma Elish. So what are the parallels there?
Separated the waters from the waters, for example. That's in the Enuma Elish, and that's also in the biblical text.
Okay, that I would agree is a parallel. The only reason I highlight that is that if you're going...
Try not to laugh, but because, you can find such connections with anything, not just the ancient text. Literally anything. You can
Yeah.
basic connections like that.
And to Wes's point prior, using similar language like that could be setting up the apologetic against, right? Because this is God separated the waters from the waters, as opposed to, as was described in the Enuma Elish, the sky was separated from the dead bodies of the gods. And so the description of how both are being made is entirely different. And so even though it draws similar language, it's actually to highlight the difference, right? The Hebrew text is highlighting the difference between the way you, pagan, think that the sky, the waters were separated, the sky and the water, versus how God did it. So it's actually, even in the parallels, it's specifically an apologetic against, meaning it's definitely not a copy. You could argue it's familiar with those texts because it uses that one reference, but honestly, it doesn't even reference most of the story as we heard him describe the crazy story of Enuma Elish, which is not anywhere in Genesis.
You're making this.
I remind
argument.
everybody that the Jews were monotheist and the other stories are polytheist. I mean, that alone should be a done deal for similarities. And also, we noticed the gods in that Sumerian and Akkadian story spawn from the universe, whereas in the Bible, the one God makes the universe. I mean, to me, that seems like completely total polar opposites from one another. So any similarities is just going to be verbiage, and as you were saying, Michael, probably to appeal to audiences that would be familiar with these stories, but it's like rhetoric, trying to say, okay, you have heard this said. In reality, this is how it happened.
Right. And this debate could go on forever. That was really Wes's point. I think we made it. So let's skip to an hour ahead again. Reminder, it's 2-hour debate discussion. But Billy leaves an hour and a half in because it's more of this kind of stuff. He brings up some killer point that he's got, and Wes is like, actually, have you ever read 3 sentences of that? Because it says the opposite of what you're saying. So we will go to an hour ahead when more of it's happening. Another highlight point. Is it like exactly at an hour? There we go.
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, my question is, most of that is oral history, correct?
The Aboriginal people, I can go into that.
I'll give it Billy Carson. So Billy Carson is in the process of describing how he searches facts. So he's kind of gotten kicked around this whole debate with everything he has to say about the Bible being utterly debunked. And so now he's saying, well, okay, that's only like 10% of my whole argument. 90% of my argument is going to random Amazonian tribes, random American tribes, the Hopi, and asking them what they've learned from demons, and then their demonic language or the demonic knowledge is true. And that means that not only, I guess, the Bible isn't false, but at least my stuff is true. So he's in the middle of describing, I think, the Hopis or something, like how he is discovering true knowledge.
Them as well. I've gone to walkabouts
Do you mind?
In the Outback.
Yeah.
The Aboriginal elders, same thing. They were seated here by Pleiadians. This is their verbal handed down history for thousands of years. And I can go around the world and I can come up with all this information from all these eyewitness accounts from people that should be respected, dignified, and shouldn't be scoffed. And that we're now saying that all this information that they put forward, all their verbal handed down history, all their written history, that's got to go to the side because this one text is 1,000% accurate.
So now he's saying, even if there's no problems with the Bible, because all of my problems with them were just smacked down with very easily. If you are claiming exclusivity, meaning the Bible is saying that it's true and you're not, which of course it is, any belief is claiming exclusivity, then you are ignoring all these tribal elders that I've gone and talked to, Aboriginals in Australia and people in the US and the Inca and whoever else that I've gone and personally talked to, and they've got written histories. So what do you say about their histories, huh? Considering Billy Carson takes the most popular written history in the world and karate chops it and throws it, uses it as a butt wipe and then throws it away and then spits on it and makes a fake copy of it and burns it. You'd think that he would expect that kind of behavior against his preferred written histories, but we'll see how Wes handles it.
Sure, but so my question is, most of that is oral history, correct?
Oh, it's all oral history, even the Bible.
He says it's oral and written history, but now he's like, oh, actually, all these tribes that I talked to, it's actually all oral history, meaning it's not written down. There's no way to verify that it's actually the same story as it was 100 years ago, let alone 1,000 years ago. Oral histories, of course, have the tendency to be altered over the years. And worst of all about oral history is that we don't have a written history of. we don't know that they aren't brand new. Like they could be very new. And so when they make predictions about things, like they make predictions about there's planets and one day somebody will cure polio, and people go, oh my gosh, the Aboriginals of Australia predicted that Mars was a planet. I mean, maybe, like ancient people could do that. So I guess like it's possible, but it's also possible that that is a after the fact revelation that has been, we lost when that originated from. And so now that, because it's all oral history, we don't know whether it's a good proof point for that belief being true, considering it may have had modern knowledge to make that kind of prediction.
Would it be then fair to say that a story, for example, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, is more reliable than a Hopi legend that was recently now written down or identified, because supposedly the Epic of Gilgamesh is closer to the events when it took place than this Hopi legend that's just been written down in the last 100 years?
I mean, they're all extremely far away from whenever they're supposed things happen, so that's hard. But at least with the Epic of Gilgamesh, we have written documents of it, and we have other comparative documents that say similar things, so we know how it was evolving at the time, and we know how people were distributing it at the time. So at least there's that, right? The Hopi don't even have that, because we don't have records of interviews with Hopi people 100 years ago, let alone 5,000 years ago, or however long they supposedly got some of the revelations they have. So yes, definitely. The Epic of Gilgamesh is definitely more reliable than a Hopi legend, because at least we know that it is what people were actually thinking 5,000 years ago, whereas the Hopi could have made this up and forgotten that it was made up within a generation. So that's very bad. And that's why oral histories are so hard to trace back reliable. You can at least record, okay, as of this date, 2024, this is what the Hopi currently believe. But now you're making it a written history, which is really why writing is so important.
Bible.
Okay, so when we're engaging with oral history, what methodologies are you using to confirm that the orality is accurate?
And for the record, so if you're faced with this conundrum, you have a story and you have to do your best to see if it's true, right? And it's only passed via orality, via words. There are methodologies to try to have some semblance of telling if something is accurate, and usually it involves going to separate, unrelated tribes. They don't know that you're interviewing them, and you go and interview multiple of them to see if their stories match up, and you take usually the matching parts of their stories and ignore the unmatching parts of their stories, because the unmatching parts of their stories may have been made up recently, but the matching parts of their stories may have been at least a longer tradition, because they both were using it, right? So that's typically a methodology we use in oral traditions, is interviewing multiple people, and not taking one group's word for it, but interviewing a large swath of people that hold a similar legends positions, and taking just the commonalities to be true.
So that's an answer, Michael. Let's see what Billy would say to answer that question.
Oh, man. Well, first and foremost, some of these cultures have written down information in caves.
So he said it was all oral, but now some of them have written stuff in caves. Okay, story's changing.
We got cave paintings. The Dogon tribe actually have not only written down.
Sure. No, I don't disagree with that. The question is one of historic. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. The question is one of methodological analysis. So you have to have a method by which you can find either that something is falsifiable, or that there are avenues by which you can show internal and external accuracy of credibility. So this is what we do with documents. This is what we do with the ancient Gospels. This is what I do. I've worked on Xenophon and Plutarch. And we look at the internal evidences and the external multivalent corroboration to try to figure out, okay, yes, we have all these stories. Great. I don't deny that. But as a historian, as someone who's trying to figure out what is accurate, how do you know if I use the term verisimilitude, do you know what that term means?
No, but I can tell you this. Tell me how the Dogon tribe saw Sirius B, knew the orbit of Sirius B, a trinary star system accurately, and can show you the orbit with a special tool that they made that was given to them by these people. How do they know the shapes, the sizes, the colors, and the orbital pattern of all these planets in our solar system, and other star alignments that they would use to have something called the Ziggy and planet and their own harvesting and planting and so forth and so on? That's not enough evidence that there's something.
Well, I'm not aware of that particular case. And even, I would grant that, the ancient people are far more technological advanced than we give themselves credit for. Just because they're ancient doesn't mean they're stupid.
I.e., you think it's aliens. You are claiming because these people could see the stars, that aliens must have given them this knowledge, and I would agree with Wes here, and that people, whether they're primitive or not, typically are pretty smart, and so even if they don't have modern technology, they can still come up with ways to track the stars. And so even Billy admits that they have a tool that helps them track Series B, whatever, some star system. So it's a tool, and I'm sure it's not a it's not alien to us, you know. It's like some sticks or whatever that like line up with the thing. I mean, not to say it's not ingenious in its own way, but it's not alien technology. It's human technology.
Yeah. I would say also, because he mentioned it, and I think he doesn't get back to this, unfortunately, internal and external evidence to verify something is true. You just mentioned the external sources of how to verify, an oral story. You interview secretly different tribes to make sure what matches up, what doesn't match up, and then
verisimilitude, to use the fancy word that he just used.
Précis. Yep, exactly. And then I mentioned it, I don't know how long ago. I mean, we've been going this for a long time. Very early on in this episode, I mentioned how you can throw out some of these Gospel of Barnabas and a lot of Gnostic Gospels because they had no idea of the actual geography or names of locations back during the time of Jesus. Like they're calling them what they would be called 500 years later instead of what they were called 500 years before. That's internal, you see. So that's how you can internally verify a text to see if it is historically accurate. Right. So that will be, this is an answer. What Michael said or what I have said, that will be a wonderful answer. Will Billy say anything along those lines? A mystery.
You can already see that he's not, because he didn't answer the question. He asked, like, what's your methodology of verifying oral histories? And he goes, he doesn't. He's never even thought about doing that, right? He flew out, I guess, to go interview Aboriginal tribes. I kind of doubt. I don't know. I haven't followed Billy Carson for very long, so I don't know if he's actually gone and done these interviews. But it kind of seems like Tales of the Schoolyard, where you're like, oh yeah, my dad's 6'8" and he can beat you up. Like, oh yeah, I've gone and talked to these tribal leaders. Have you? I mean, you can, so I guess it's not that impressive that you would have, except that it takes a lot of time and money and coordination. But it doesn't change anything, because the only thing it's changing is if somebody was lying on the internet that the Hopi believed something they didn't actually believe. Now you went and talked to the Hopi and they told you they believed it. So confirmed it's what modern Hopi believe, but it does not help you determine whether or not what the Hopi believed was true or even consistent with what they believed 100 years ago. And that's really what we want to get after. So he scoffs at the notion of even trying to do that, and then completely jukes the question by saying, well, if it wasn't true, no, I have, basically in parentheses, no, I have not done any analysis like that to see if these people's oral stories are consistent. However, they did show me some cool sticks that can track planets. How could they have done that if their legends weren't true? The legends about the fact that they learned to do this via aliens. And Wes is like, maybe because it doesn't require aliens. Like maybe they just did it themselves, Resurrection of Jesus is one thing where nobody can do it, right? So neither could the ancients. But like, not only do modern people track the planets, but ancient people also track the planets. It's very possible to do that without aliens. Whereas the resurrection, that would be some alien stuff, or God.
Well aware, as someone who has done both investigation of the past and done archaeological analysis, that is a reality. My question is simply, okay, you have these stories or you have these accounts, you're referring to them as eyewitness testimony. How are you going about verifying that as that?
Well, if the people had eyewitness testimony about Jesus, they then just wrote down their eyewitness testimony on a piece of paper or parchment paper or papyrus. So these people...
Right. So that's where internal methodological analysis...
Some of it's actually written down. So, I mean, it's the same exact thing. There's really no difference.
Well, no, so...
He's going to get into it, and we probably cut it short because we've been talking so long. You can watch the whole debate if you want to see it all. But this is going to go down classic apologetics lines if you've heard it. But the Gospels are 4 different independent witness accounts, right? They all are Christians, so I guess they're not fully independent, but they're independent of each other. And they are witnessing about the same event with different details that all align together. They're internally consistent. They're externally consistent. They match up with non-Christian historians about the fact that Jesus died and all the other details that are presented that are mentioned in other texts. So so when Billy Carson says there's no difference between the fact of between the writing down of the Gospels, which was just somebody's eyewitness testimony back in early Christian days, and somebody telling you their eyewitness testimony right now, okay, except that the Hopi are not telling you, or whoever you're talking to, are not telling you their eyewitness testimony. They're telling you some great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpappy's eyewitness testimony that's not written down, so it probably has changed since that time. And even if they were giving you their eyewitness testimony, they saw the alien, it would be best if you could have multiple independent corroborating sources that all saw the alien, that weren't all in the same space. They were far off in a mountain or something like that, and we're giving different details that all matched up together about the alien. Like that would be best case, and that's what we have in the Bible, right? It's unparalleled in its verisimilitude or other things that would defend it as a genuine work. So no, he says no, I don't have any of that. And the Bible, it clearly does not appreciate the fact that the Bible is so robust in that regard. Yeah. I mean, we can keep going. It is a long debate, so I think we should probably cut it here. But what final words would you have, Sebastian, from this experience?
Yeah, the best part, if you keep watching too, is when he says, I get on an airplane and I interview these people. That's how I verify the first-hand sources. And takeaways, be careful who you're debating. That's very important, because you never expect the geek, with all due respect and praise, to absolutely destroy all the unhinged conspiracies that you have been making and really getting no pushback. So before you start attacking Christianity and promoting some odd things like ancient aliens, you need to make sure that you have read these sources. Based on what we have seen here, I've eyes to see and ears to hear, he hasn't done basic research to make obscene claims, Billy Carson that is, that the Bible was doctored and edited and changed, even though you can go online right now and verify that that's not true. There are documents before Nicaea that show the Bible, how it was written down, and there's internal evidence within scriptures. So compared to all these odd myths that other civilizations have come up with.
And again, we don't see it in this debate, but the true telling sign, the smoking gun of Billy Carson's fakeness here is that he didn't take this as a learning experience. He didn't go, oh man, I was way unprepared for that. I should look into these things and see if what Wes was telling me was true. None of that. Instead, he sues them. He says that he's being deep faked. He says he was sick. Every excuse in the book, right? And how bad this went. And I mean, it went bad. Here we are trashing it. But what was it like? The worst thing ever? No. Even Wes, on a reaction after the debate, said that he didn't think it was that good of a debate. He's like, oh, I got some points in there, but I don't know what viewers will think. So I think that if Billy Carson just let this alone, one, we may have a better idea of how genuine he is in his beliefs, and that maybe he is willing to learn, and he's willing to, at least, even if he's not willing to learn, he's willing to say, oh, he really got me on some of those points. I should figure out why he's wrong. Like at least some sort of retrospective, introspective, how could I have done better? But instead, no, it's like every excuse in the book. I think he is a liar. He's speaking lies, so there's lies in that. But I think he is a purposeful, known liar that does not care about the truth. He really just cares about making people interested, watching him, giving him money, and the novelty of new ideas. Like he doesn't care if they're new or not, and so, or if they're true or not. He cares if they're new. And that's shameful, right? Like the most shameful thing to me about this debate was not the debate itself, but it's the reaction to it, and that he is clearly a self-aware fraudster, and we should stay away from men like Billy Carson. And people who argue similarly to him know that he is a good poster boy for somebody who's telling you that they've read about the emerald tablets of Thoth, or that Jesus wasn't really God, or that people have changed the Bible after its original creation. Like he's a poster boy for all of these conspiracy theories. If you ever watched The Zeitgeist, a very similar movie to this as far as ancient aliens and the Bible was doctored and all the rest, they all fall apart under any actual scrutiny, especially from like wise scrutiny, but even from basic scrutiny. So I would encourage our listeners to mark Billy Carson as a false teacher, but anytime you hear these kind of arguments, to know how Wes responded is very erudite, but you don't even need to be as smart as Wes. You just have to ask the questions. How did you come to that conclusion, right? Why do you think that your opinions are better than the Bible? And at some point in this debate, I think 30 minutes in here, he starts getting more agitated and starts saying that Christianity has had its boot on the neck of women for years, and he just is pulling out all these reasons why he doesn't like Christianity, regardless of whether it's true or not. He doesn't like it, which believers of the Bible like us would know that really is the root of all rebellion against God, is just hatred of God. The facts don't matter. They just hate God.
In other words, you don't believe in God because there's not enough evidence, but it's just really whether you want to or not. So he just doesn't want to believe in God. And then he laid out some, and some of those reasons were like coming out based on his frustration, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Any closing comments, or are we good to wrap?
I think we're good to wrap. I do want to say that we're going to save that episode for those commons, misconceptions, lies, conspiracies about Jesus when you're back from your trip, because if you end up going, don't say anything, but if you end up going where I think you're going, take a picture and we'll use that as a launching pad for the episode on common conspiracies about Jesus and Christianity when we do a full dedicated video on that.
All right, stay tuned to 2025 then. You have to listen to us for a while to find that episode. Good teaser. We have been The Found Cause, where we found our cause in the servant of the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm Michael, the man behind the machine, and to my virtual front, it's been
Sebastian, the archivist.
And let's not forget Mr. Billy Carson and Wes Huff. Thanks for volunteering your faces. I would encourage you to go to youtube.com/foundcause and looking us up there. We got this video, we got many others about similar topics if we've already alluded to, and you can watch more. You can also check out this particular debate. I'll have the link in the description of this video. We're on Facebook, same deal there. We're also on Spotify and iTunes and wherever else you find your podcast. Those are audio only though if you want to watch us on the go. Until next time, where we talk about something completely different. Thanks for listening. Bye.